Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's around 9 o'clock Eastern time here. We're going to get started in a few minutes. We'll just wait a few additional minutes here to let some stragglers join in, but we're going to get started in just a few. Okay, guys, we're going to get started in just a few minutes here. Please feel free to log on. And as you do, you guys will notice a chat and a question function. Want to let you guys know to feel free to utilize that at any time. We're going to do a roundtable Q&A with our advisors at the end of these sessions. So feel free to start asking questions now. It can be on anything application related, med school related, whatever you want. Throw in those questions and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes to get started here. I just want to run a quick poll while we're waiting for everybody to log in. Feel free to answer this poll and give us a little bit of an idea of where everybody stands. Okay, everybody, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes here. Again, feel free to ask some questions on the chat function or the question function in the GoToWebinar. That will allow us at the end of the presentation to be able to talk to you and give you some feedback. Feel free to ask away, and we will definitely try to get to as many of those questions as possible. It's about 9:03. We're going to get started in about another minute here just to let a few other people log on who may be having some technical issues. Okay, everybody, it's about 9:04, so we're going to get started tonight. First, I'd like to really thank everybody for joining us. We are super excited to be hosting this webinar for you guys and for you guys to get some idea of the application process as well as what it's going to take to get into med school. We have an awesome panel on deck for you today. And this webinar is brought to you by MedSchoolCoach as well as Prospective Doctor, and the websites are there. We'll talk a little bit more about each of these and what you can find on these different websites as we go. But a couple of things I wanted to bring to everybody who's out there listening to us, their attention today. The first is the question function. Again, please feel free to use the question function. Ask questions as we go. We're going to do a roundtable Q&A all the way at the end with each of our advisors. This will really give you an awesome opportunity to talk with each of them sort of almost in a one-on-one fashion. And so really encourage you guys to ask questions as you go. There will be a recording of this webinar available. At the end, we will send you some instructions on how to get that recording in a day or two. So for those of you who have to log out early, we will get that. But one of the most important things here is the question answer. So we encourage you to stay on all the way until the end. So without further ado, I want to get started here. So again, welcome to our webinar tonight entitled Putting Together a Great Medical School Application from personal statement to school list and honestly everything in between. And I wanted to take a moment to introduce you to our hosts, who you guys see on webcam there. So I myself am here, Dr. Mehta, founder of MedSchoolCoach. I have with me Dr. Marinelli. She's MedSchoolCoach's Director of Advising and a former AdCom member at UC Irvine. Dr. Lipset, a retired radiologist and a former AdCom member at VCU. And Dr. Katzen, an oncologist in the DC area and former admissions committee member at George Washington. So we have an awesome panel. Thank you, panelists, everybody, for chiming in. You just want to say a quick hello. Ed, you want to say a quick hi?
Hello to everyone. Welcome.
Thanks. And Harvey, Dr. Katzen, you're on board too. You want to say a quick hi to everybody and a quick intro?
Hello, and we look forward to helping you in your journey to med school.
Awesome, thank you. And now I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Marinelli, who's going to lead us through the presentation. She will sort of be interjecting and telling us a little bit about the application, and each of us, Dr. Lipset, Dr. Katzen, and myself, will interject as we go. We've kind of made this as interactive as possible. We want you guys to be able to, again, ask questions. We want to kind of feed off each other and be able to give you the best advice we can. Sometimes we may not always agree on the things that we're going to say, but that's actually part of the fun. As you know, as anybody who's applying should know, not everybody on the admissions committee thinks exactly the same way, and that's part of your challenge as a student. So, Dr. Marinelli, why don't you take it away?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Thanks, Dr. Mehta. So whenever you're ready, I'll have you advance to the next slide and we'll get started. So one thing to take into account for this application cycle is when do the applications actually start. So for most of the applications, they open a certain date and then you can actually start completing them and filling them out, and then they open for submission at a later date. So the important one to pay attention to is amcast, which is the allopathic or MD application. That one opens May 2nd this year and you can submit it May 1st. AOCOMAS, which is the osteopathic application, they haven't announced their opening, but last year it was May 14th. And you can also submit it in May, but you don't have to rush through it because med schools don't actually start receiving the application until like June 15th or so. So you definitely don't want to just open it up and submit it right away. And the same thing kind of goes for the Texas application, which is the TMD SAS. So that one opens May 1st and you can actually submit it May 1st. But even on their website, they have a little bit of a blurb there that encourages you not to just submit it right away because they've noticed people have made mistakes in the past. So make sure you take your time to work through the application. You don't have to submit it the day that it opens. So we'll talk a little bit more about submission, but one thing you want to do as soon as the application opens is go in there, input all of the colleges that you went to. Even if you took a course in high school and you received credit for it, you need to request that transcript. So enter the colleges that you went to, and then it will take you to a transcript request form. And you want to print that out and send that to that college right away. Transcripts can really delay your application if you wait too long. So this should be one of your very first steps when you open up the application to start completing it. So I think we're getting some feedback. Hopefully that's better.
So Renee, we shared a quick poll, and I'll share these results again, that a lot of people are applying this year or applying next year. And I'm not sure how many of these people actually mean that they're applying in the 2018 application cycle. A common question we get is, when should I start requesting these transcripts? So what do you recommend in terms of exact dates?
So for some people, they want to include their spring semester grades. And especially if your grades are good for that spring semester, or maybe you satisfied some prerequisites during that spring semester, you should try as best as you can to include those grades. What I recommend doing is contacting your registrar's office and seeing when those grades will be posted officially on your transcript. If it's like towards, the middle or end of May, you can submit the transcripts, but I would do it as a urgent request. Most schools will process it urgently. If you request them to, you might have to pay a little bit for that, but I would process it urgently so you get the transcript received as close to that submission date of May 31st as possible. But otherwise, if you have other grades, if you're done with school, if you've completed your degree, just submit it right away. So that's kind of the first step on the application. The application does follow a little bit of a chronological order, so to speak. And the first types of things are biographical information. But I wanted to talk about the transcripts first, because that should be your #1 priority when you're able to open that transcript in May. The next part of the application is just entering a bunch of information about yourself, your address, your permanent address, things like that. And we see this happen all the time, and I do a lot of application reviews, and I see this maybe in 20 to 30% of applications where somebody kind of mistakenly or just absentmindedly made a tiny simple error, like not capitalize Miami in this application. And it's important to really pay attention to this because it actually really matters. When med schools admissions committees see this, they think that you just don't really care. You didn't really put the effort into your application. So make sure you go through this part slow, enter everything correctly, and then check it again, and then check it again. This can really change the fate of your application, so to speak.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that applicants throw away their application with. And I'll let Dr. Lipset maybe chime in. Dr. Lipset, when you see typos or some sort of silly mistakes, what is the first thing that goes through your head when you look at an application?
Well, that's a real problem. There are two thoughts that go through my head. Either the person really does have difficulty writing, expressing themselves, or paying attention to actually understanding grammar and punctuation and syntax, or they know it, but they just didn't spend the time and the effort. They're not detail oriented. So either way, it's a big negative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, Dr. Katzen, when you see this, what do you think?
I pretty much echo what Dr. Lipset said. Basically, I look at it, somebody is either careless or they just didn't take the time to be methodical about going through something. And obviously, when you're applying to med school, that potentially could have implications that might carry over to the quality of patient care you might give. And minor errors like that may, to me, almost eliminate you at the very early stages before it even gets to the true committee. There's actually some screening that goes on at what I'll call a secretarial level, whether it's your statistics or if you see too many of these errors, it's not going to get to the true admissions committee.
Yeah, and I'll just echo the statements of all three of our panelists in that, when I see an application like this, I almost throw it away because there's too many great applications, and for somebody to make mistakes like this, I already in my head have a connotation of what I think this applicant is just by a simple mistake. So as hard as that sounds and as sort of unfair as that may sound, I hope this drives home the point that Dr. Marinelli is making of how important it is to sort of put together an application without any errors.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next part of your application, so you're going to enter the colleges that you went to, and then you're going to enter your coursework. And this is a super tedious process. So what we all recommend, I think we probably have a consensus on this, is printing out a transcript from each school that you went to, sitting down at your computer, having the transcript on the side, and going one by one, entering the name, exactly how it's written on the transcript, entering the units, entering your grade, exactly as close to as possible as that transcript says. If you have any errors or if there's any discrepancies between what you entered and the transcripts, the official transcripts that AMCAS receives, this can result in delay of the application because they have to go through and verify these courses individually. So you don't want this to be a potential delay. You also have a chance to designate the courses as bio, chem, physics, and math, and that goes into your BCPM GPA. So that's a pretty significant GPA. Medical schools really want to see that GPA as high as possible. And then your total GPA is the cumulative GPA of the combined science courses and then all of your other courses. Dr. Mehta, if you could go to the next slide. So there is a little bit of a gray area here, so to speak. So if you look at the AMCAS instruction manual, they have a classification of all the courses that you can classify as BCPM or all other. If you have a class that's kind of interdisciplinary, so let's say biopsychology or something like that, that's kind of on the lines of biology and like social science or something like that, you can choose to designate it in one category of the other. And you can kind of help boost up your BCPM GPA. Let's say if the biopsych class was an A, you'd want to categorize that as a BCPM to boost up that GPA as much as possible. Again, you have to stay as honest as possible, and I highlighted the statement that AMCAS uses that you can choose the category of the course that most is heavily described in your course manual. So make sure you're honest, but this is a way to kind of help boost up that BCPM GPA a little bit.
Awesome, thanks. Hey, I'm going to launch a quick poll here for our audience, just so we get a little bit of a gauge of what you guys are most excited or most scared about on the application process, so we can help you along. So take a second to vote. And as you guys are voting, remember that please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation here. We're going to get to a lot of these questions at the end at the roundtable discussion. So this is your chance to kind of pick the brains of 4 people who've been on the admissions committee. Okay, so let's take a look here. Let's see what people are scared of. Sorry about that. Trying to get to. Let's go back here for a sec. There we go. All right, closing the poll and sharing the results. And as you guys can see, we've got a lot of people scared of the personal statement, some people scared of choosing letters of recommendation, choosing schools, interviews. Surprisingly, not a lot of people scared of the interview. I guess everybody out there has got some good interview skills already, but a lot of people are scared of pretty much everything. So, you know, hopefully by the end of this, you guys aren't scared of everything, and we can give you some good advice. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Marinelli here, who's going to talk a little bit about the application and the activities section.
Sure. So the activities is another big area of your application, and I will go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Lipset if you want to take some advice or give some advice on the activities section.
Sure, thank you. Well, you know, through the activities section, through that listing of activities, you know, what you're really doing is you're describing to the committee the experiences that in many ways define you. There are activities that contribute to your personality, to your worldview. It's 15 activities with half a dozen or so categories. And several of these activities, 2 or 3, should be what's called most meaningful. And if you really think about the categories, to me, they represent the qualities that you'd probably want to see in your own personal physician, or in a physician that you would recommend to family members. And I'll briefly go over the categories. Volunteer. Now, why do they ask you for volunteer work? Well, it tells the committee a lot about your commitment to being altruistic. You can relate to people. You can embrace diversity. Medically related activities. Simply put, do you know what you're getting yourself into? And they realize that by shadowing activities or perhaps being an EMT or a scribe, you're not going to really learn how to be a doctor, but you're certainly going to see what a doctor experiences. And after going through that, if you're committed to becoming a physician, they'll believe you. Research. Well, I think research demonstrates to the committee that you can collaborate. If you have any publishing experience, someday you'll contribute to the medical literature. Research also shows that you're committed to learning and you're going to be a lifelong student. Tutoring is very important. And the reason is through tutoring, you demonstrate that you're an educator. And I'm not just talking about individuals who might want to go into academic medicine. Fact of the matter is, even as a clinician, you educate patients. You partner with them, you empower them, you instruct them. In that way, they'll trust you, they'll be compliant. So if you've had experience mentoring and tutoring, this is an activity that you will be doing as a physician on a day-to-day basis as you relate to your patients. Now, employment, that shows a work ethic. Leadership, I think that speaks for itself. Hopefully you'll be a leader in your community. The extracurricular activities, it tells the committee that, frankly, you're an interesting person who may bring special talents to the class. So, not only do you embrace diversity, but you appreciate diversity and you bring diversity to the class. Simply put, I think the activities list says a lot about you and helps the committee understand exactly who you are. Now, a couple of important comments about activities that you can place on the list. Firstly, you must have begun the activity prior to your submitting your primary application. And that makes a lot of sense because the committee really doesn't care about future plans, potential activities that you might be doing. So you really need to plan ahead. And you have to make sure that these categories are going to be filled with both quality and quantity. In terms of quality, of course, I don't really have to say much about that. They should be very important activities, impressive activities, but quantity also counts to some extent in that you will be listing the dates of participation, the number of hours. So that's also important, showing that it's a meaningful activity and you were truly committed to engaging in that activity. Now, filling the categories, that's also very important. You don't want to leave any soft spots. And to some extent, that's an art. I have found in general that the committees are very liberal about this, in that you really do get to designate, and there is some overlap. For example, if you spent a year working in a free clinic, well, that's certainly altruistic, that's certainly a volunteer activity, but at the same time, it's a medically related activity. So when you work with your advisor and you create this large list of important activities, we then fill the areas, the categories, so that there are no soft spots in the application. And hopefully, the end result will be a very impressive activities list.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Lipset, for that intro to the activity sections. Hopefully that helps you guys a little bit in understanding what you're supposed to put on here. So, Dr. Marinelli, I'll channel it back to you to talk a little bit about the letters of recommendation.
Yeah, sure. So letters of recommendation are another big aspect of the application. I feel like we keep repeating ourselves saying that it's a big aspect, but this is something that you should be thinking about right now if you haven't started this already. So each medical school has their individual requirements, but in general, if you get 2 letters from science professors, 1 from a non-science professor, and 1 to 2 from other people, maybe a physician that you've worked with, your principal investigator in your research, somebody in the community that maybe you worked with through a community service project with, those will satisfy most medical school requirement. As I said, you should really already be thinking about this. And if you haven't started requesting these letters, please go do this tomorrow, because a lot of professors get backlogged with writing letters, especially in the spring and the summer when a lot of applications are going on for medical school and other graduate programs. So you don't want this to delay your application at all. You can still submit your application without the letters, but schools will not consider your application complete until you have their required letters of recommendation. So try to get these in as soon as possible. Dr. Katzen, I'll hand it over to you if you want to give us some, advice and tips on how to write the personal statement.
Sure, thank you. What I'd like to just emphasize, and I'm going to really pick up where Dr. Lipset left off, and that is when you're looking at the AMCAS application, you really should be thinking about an overall strategy of how are you best going to present yourself as an applicant to the admissions committee. Beyond the demographics and that must be done accurately, entering your transcript, the part which really you shouldn't make mistakes on. The most important parts of the application beyond that to the admissions committee are really the personal statement and the activities, as Dr. Lips had very carefully described. Between the two of those, you should be presenting yourself as an interesting person, as somebody, as has been stated, who's altruistic and has experiences. In the personal statement, you need to make a case for yourself. Why should you be given the opportunity to become a physician or to be admitted to medical school? Surprisingly, a lot of times we see simple things that are wrong in a personal statement, such as typographical, grammatic errors. People try to get fancy with fonts, which are not going to be accepted when you try to upload to the AMCAS site. The personal statement needs to start with something interesting. If it starts with, I wanted to be a doctor since I was 5, my dad's a doctor and I want to be one too, that's probably the last part of that personal statement that will be read. I've got 8,000 to 10,000 applications. That one didn't cut it for me to even continue reading it. You want to start with what we refer to as a hook, something interesting. Make me interested to continue to read. Ideally, I think it's always helpful if, as much as possible, you can speak from personal experiences. Were you a first responder in a motorcycle accident? Did you look down and see blood spurting? Did you see the heart beating? And it doesn't have to be medical. It can be anything that makes you interesting. This may sound like English 101, but the essay has to flow, and it has to flow from paragraph to paragraph and from beginning to end. The components, once you have established something to interest me, the components that you want to get across, whether it's in one paragraph or an underlying theme, to me are, you've got to have a passion, a reason that you want to become a physician. I would like to see in there that you've done some shadowing or had some clinical experience. I don't want to think that you want to become a physician because you watched 3 episodes of Grey's Anatomy and thought it would be a neat thing to do. That's not going to cut it. We need to know you, as Dr. Lipset already pointed out, you know what you're getting into, and you prove that to me through your experiences that you might want to weave in. It would be ideal if you could show some form of leadership. Leadership doesn't have to be the president of a club. The captain, it could be the captain of a team. It could be mentoring or tutoring. It could be anything. I'd like to see that you have overcome a challenge. You know, being a physician, every day doesn't go easily, and every patient, the first thing you do, sometimes it doesn't work. I want to know you don't get defeated easily. I don't care if you show me that you overcome challenges because you were bullied, because you were doing research and maybe the results weren't right. You had to go back and change the temperature of the water bath, work at night. You had to work on your presentation. Or maybe it's academic. Maybe you had to figure out how to get through organic, study more, go to the teaching assistant, the professor, or study sessions. I think that we should somehow know about that you've done some volunteering. Between the personal statement and the experiences, ideally you don't want to be repetitive, but I think the point that Dr. Lipset made is critical, and that is you're presenting yourself between these two very crucial parts of the application as somebody that is interesting, somebody that is altruistic, and somebody that knows what they're getting into. I think that once you have those components, the final paragraph should pull it all together, making the case to present yourself as, why are you going to be an asset to the profession? What have you done that shows me you deserve the opportunity to be admitted to medical school? The final thing that I would say about the personal statement is read it, reread it, edit it, use a spell check, use a grammar check, read it and read it again and edit it. Spelling matters, grammar matters, and just as we began this part of the presentation, if we see lowercase, if we see in the wrong place, inappropriate punctuation, there are lots of ways to interpret that. In this day and age of the word processor, were you too lazy to push the button to do a spell and or grammar check? And if you were, you're probably not the material that we're looking for. It sounds very petty, but it's not. We need to understand that we're accepting somebody who has painstakingly done the best job that they can. In summary, you need to write a personal statement that flows, it demonstrates your passion, and it starts with something interesting, not something boring or trite. Now turn back to Dr. Marinelli.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Casson. That's really took you through A to Z of writing the personal statement. So hopefully that gives you guys some kind of thoughts and ideas on how to get started. Lastly, we'll cover how to choose schools to apply to. So this, when I go through a lot of applications, I look at, again, schools don't see which other schools you apply to. I'm talking about like when I review an application to see if somebody made a mistake or something like that. I see a lot of people not maximizing their potential through the school list. And that's either applying to too few schools, sometimes even too many schools, or just applying to schools where they're not competitive. So when you select the schools, you want to plan to apply to somewhere between 25 to 35 schools, depending on the strength of yourself as an applicant. If you have, a 520 MCAT and a 3.9 GPA, you could maybe apply to like 20 to 25, maybe a little bit less. But if you're somebody that's an average applicant or slightly above average, probably between 25 to 35 schools. Some people ask me, Dr. Marinelli, can I apply to 60? And I said, yeah, you can apply to 60, but once the secondaries start coming in, you're not going to want to have applied to 60 schools. Secondary applications are the time where it becomes very, very time consuming, very daunting to have to complete 60 secondary essays. So try to maximize the school list as much as possible so then you don't have to complete a bunch of secondaries for schools where you're not even competitive at. So one thing you want to do is apply to all your in-state schools, even if you have a 508 and you're a California resident. Still apply to Stanford. It's still your state school. There is still some preference for in-state residents at every in-state school. The other thing you want to do is really look at your competitiveness based on your MCAT and your GPA. The schools release their median MCAT and GPAs. Every school does. So you want to see where you fit in. Again, it's kind of going to be a range. It's a median. It's not a direct mean, and it's not like the only number that I accept. So if their median is a 510, well, if you have a 508 or if you have a 513, you're somewhere in their range of accepted GP or MCATs. One thing to consider as well, if you're waiting for your MCAT score, you can submit your application without your MCAT score and get that verification process that I was talking about before, get that process going. So what I recommend doing is just selecting one school after you've completed your whole application, submit it May 31st, and as soon as that MCAT score comes in, then you can add schools based on your competitiveness of that MCAT score. So that's a good way for some of you that are maybe taking the MCAT in May or even early June. We don't totally suggest, but May and your score is coming out in June, to still get your application submitted on time, but then make it as most useful as possible by adding those schools later on where you're competitive at. Dr. Mehta, do you want to touch on Prospective Doctor and our med school chance predictor?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a lot of great tools out there for you guys to try to choose schools. I think one great tool is definitely the AAMC and the AMSAR. AMSAR is essentially the official publication, and it can cost something like $19 or $20 for you to buy. And I would recommend almost every medical school applicant who's going through just buy that, because it gives you the breakdown for each and every school and a lot of key information on every school. What it doesn't do, though, it doesn't really quickly sort through all the schools and where you're competitive for. So we've actually created a tool that I think will help with this. And so if you go to prospectivedoctor.com and you go click on the medical school chance predictor, you'll actually have a chance to enter in your information, like your GPA, your science GPA, your MCAT, as well as your state residence and ethnicity. And if you click the predict button, it's actually going to give you a whole bunch of different schools, their average GPA, their average MCAT, the state, how much of a in-state factor that they have versus not, and then kind of what your chances are. So every single person who's applying to med school should probably use this tool at least as a first glance to check out what you can find and to see where you might be competitive for. And it's, again, very easy to get to if you just go to prospectivedoctor.com and then click on the tools link. You will be taken right to the chance predictor when you can get there. So I highly recommend everybody take a look at that as you go through the process of applying to school.
So finally, just to wrap things up, we talked a lot about the AMCAS application, again, the allopathic application, but the DO application does have some slight differences that you should pay attention to. So their personal statement lengths are just a little bit different. So MD is 5,300 characters, which is about a page and a half, and DO is 4,500 characters, which is somewhere around a page. I usually recommend that applicants just write one personal statement, and then if you're going to apply to osteopathic schools as well, then you can modify that personal statement a little bit just to reflect maybe your interest in osteopathy or your specific experience in osteopathic medicine. And then also the activities section, 100 character difference between the two. And the osteopathic application does not have the most meaningful experiences that Dr. Lipset had talked about previously. So just a couple differences to keep in mind as you're prepping these applications. So some final tips for everybody. Again, start early. Try to get your application in as close to that May 31st submission date as possible. I didn't touch on this before, but for those who don't know, it's so important to submit around that admission date is because most schools use rolling admissions, and that means that they start offering interviews and acceptances to the people that they receive through the applicants that they receive first. So if you submit your application in September, then there's already thousands of applicants that have submitted before you that they can choose from and start offering interviews to and accepting. So you don't want to be somebody late. Close to that May 31st date as possible. Again, I talked about the personal statement, and Dr. Katzen and Dr. Lipset all alluded to this before. If you copy paste, or if you're just going in there and getting things done, just be so careful. Proofread your application and then proofread it some more and ask for other people to look at it. I've noticed this a lot. When you write your own essay and you're reading through it 100 times, it's easy for you to bypass mistakes after you've read it so many times. So make sure you ask somebody else for tips on how to write it, but you can ask somebody, hey, can you just read this for me to make sure I didn't make any mistakes? And more than your family, your friends, they'll be more than happy to help. So make sure you're really careful as you go through this process. Prepare for it now, and then you'll be able to submit as close to that May 31st date as possible.
Awesome. So hopefully that gave you guys a little bit of an overview of the application process. Obviously, there's a lot of small details that are involved in the actual application to medical school, and there's a ton of individual things that each applicant needs to do to portray themselves as the best possible applicant. And that's what we at MedSchoolCoach and all the advisors that you are seeing as panelists today can kind of help you do, which is hone in your application to be as great as possible. All three of these guys have had just incredible success helping their applicants through the application process. And it's really because what we try to do is we try to take each and every applicant who comes to us and really break them down and understand what's going to make their individual application great. And we're obviously able to see it from the other side of people who've actually evaluated an application and understand what an admissions committee is looking for. So if you guys are out there and looking for that little extra help through your application process, that's what we do at MedSchoolCoach, and I highly encourage you to check it out. I also highly encourage you to check out Prospective Doctor, one of the tools I've already highlighted today, but it has just a wealth of information, tons and tons and tons of free articles, as well as videos and soon to come podcasts that will help you guys understand the application process and all the specifics of being a pre-med. So those are two great resources that I want to point out to you guys, and we're here for you with questions. Now, we have about 20 minutes left for the presentation today, and this is kind of the funnest part of the presentation. This is when our audience really gets to ask questions of our panelists. And in the past, we've had literally hundreds of questions, and I encourage you guys as you're going through to drop some questions into the question bar and go to webinar. But what we're going to do now is I'm basically just going to pick a few questions and kind of rapid fire to our panelists and see what they think of your individual questions. So, I'm just going to kind of start, and maybe Dr. Lipset, I'll start with you on a question that Heather out there has, which is, how do you evaluate non-traditional applicants, or how do you compare them against all the other applicants that are in the pool?
Well, I think that actually non-traditional applicants many times have an advantage. I find that usually there's something very interesting about them, something different. And what I do is I try to hone in on things about them that I find to be particularly interesting, that there may be some strong points that we can really develop. I actually look forward to working with non-traditional applicants because usually they have a very interesting story to tell. And there's a lot of interesting, I'd say, material to work with. I don't have a simple answer for you, but I find that most of the non-traditional applicants that I have worked with have a very interesting story to tell, and I make sure that that story is well told.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo some of those thoughts in that if you're a non-traditional applicant, you're actually potentially at a huge advantage no matter what you've done in the past, because you really come in with a different set of experiences than many of the other applicants have. And it's all about sort of how you characterize them and how you put them on paper. At the end of the day, that will determine if your non-traditional background serves as an advantage or a disadvantage, but in most cases, it should serve as an advantage to you. Dr. Katzen, I have a question out here that asks, how are reapplicants evaluated from a medical school admissions perspective?
I think in terms of evaluating a reapplicant, the question is, what did they do to improve themselves or change their status from the first time they applied to the second time they applied? Some people that are reapplicants may end up having been a reapplicant simply because they started the process late and were maybe not fully prepared, hadn't had enough background in the sciences, had switched over later in their career. But a reapplicant who has used the time well, who has improved their standing as an applicant, have they done research? Have they done a post-baccalaureate or master's or special master's program? Have they volunteered in a significant way? I don't really feel that a reapplicant is necessarily at a disadvantage as long as they can show that they have had some meaningful use of the time since their initial application. As I think Dr. Lipset pointed out, I feel that all of us as physicians have an internal commitment to be perpetual students and to continue to learn. And sometimes people that are reapplicants, maybe it took them longer to get adjusted and they didn't have the initial GPA, and they went back and performed very well in some postgraduate setting, being master's or directed post-baccalaureate. Maybe they found their passion through volunteering. So I do not look down upon a reapplicant. Frequently, they may be somebody who has shown you a tremendous drive and eagerness and passion to become a physician.
Awesome. Dr. Marinelli, there's a couple of questions on letters of recommendation out there. One of them is just simply, how do you approach a professor for a letter of recommendation?
That's a great question. So I get asked that quite a bit. I think for people that went to really big undergrads with maybe 300 people in their class, they can feel that getting letters of recommendation from some of those professors can be quite daunting. What I recommend, and it is a little bit late in the game to do it now if you're applying this year, but for those of you that are planning to apply, start a relationship with some professor. So maybe you'll have a professor for 2 biology courses or something like that. So go to their office hours, ask them questions, stay after class and ask them questions. Make sure that you get involved. Perform very well in their class as well. That's another way to kind of distinguish yourself amongst all these other students. So if you have time to develop that relationship, then I certainly recommend doing that. If not, and you're just a pool of the 300, hopefully maybe you've taken a class or 2 with that professor that you can ask them. Hopefully, as I said, you've distinguished yourself academically. So if you go to them, you can say, hi, Dr. Smith, I took, OChem 1 and OChem 2 with you. I got an A in both classes. I was really hoping that you could write me a letter of recommendation. Here's my resume. Here's some of my other things that I've been doing. So at least give them some background information about you. Ideally, though, you really want the person to know you personally and know your strengths, your characteristics, in order for them to write a good, comprehensive letter of recommendation for you.
Awesome, thanks. And there's a lot of questions out there actually on, what the mechanics of collecting those letters of recommendation are, and those are really great questions. We actually have a lot of information on our website at MedSchoolCoach as well as Prospective Doctor on the specific mechanics if you want to check it out and understand how to use interfolio versus a committee letter versus virtual evals or just submitting letters of recommendation directly to medical school. So there's a bunch of different ways, and I encourage you to check out the blogs to answer some of those questions. Dr. Lipset, we have a question out there that is relatively broad, but let's go for it, which is, what are some of the best things you've seen applicants do in a gap year?
Okay, that's actually a very good question, and I do work with a fair number of applicants or individuals who may anticipate the need to go another cycle, and we strategize, and there are things that can be done. Generally, the first thing that I do is I look at the application. If the applicant has failed to be successful during a given cycle, my question is why, and we try to figure that out. We go over the application together. Many times I encourage, by the way, the individual to call the schools and inquire as to why they didn't get in. Some schools don't have the time to address this, but a surprising number will actually speak with you about it so that we don't have to guess at what went wrong. But usually there are some soft spots in the application that we can identify, and we try to hone in and address those, such as, let's say the GPA is low. Well, there are things you can do. One important thing to do is perhaps do a Master's of Science program. I've got a listing of about 12 or 15 programs that, even if you go to their website, they talk about their course load as being analogous to that taken by medical students. They also talk about the fact that it's a good way of improving one's academic record, because if, let's say, your GPA is on the low side and you do not believe that that GPA is representative of your academic potential, well, what's the best way to prove that? The best way to prove that is to take higher level courses, and to demonstrate, usually a 3.5 or greater, and to demonstrate that at the graduate level, at the Masters of Science level, basically taking courses that are similar or identical to those taken by medical students, you're successful. That convinces a committee that they should perhaps discount the GPA somewhat, and it makes you a more competitive candidate. Other things that you can do, of course, if the MCAT is low, devote time and effort to prep courses. And I know that MedSchoolCoach has a very fine program that's been developed. That's where you have to concentrate and spend your effort. Many times there are gaps or holes in the activity list. And I've personally witnessed candidates who were actually quite impressive, and I'm sure they'd make great doctors, but the committees focused on areas that they believed needed to be upgraded, activities that were absent, and if we can identify those, then we create a gap experience, gap time, that addresses that, be it volunteer work, perhaps research, medically related activities. So there's no single answer. I think it requires an analysis of the application, identifying the areas that need to be addressed. I mean, this probably goes without saying, but taking more advanced graduate courses when your MCAT was low and you've got a GPA of 3.9, that's not really improving your chances for the next cycle. So it requires an analysis and specifically addressing the areas where you need improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much that people can do in a gap year, and there's so many interesting things that you can potentially do in order to improve your application, but it's really on a case-by-case basis of what's going to look the best. And sometimes there's no easy answer, right? People always want to answer the question, well, if I do X or Y, how many points is it going to get me on the application? And there's unfortunately no magic answer to that. It's not like one thing gets you 8 points and the other thing gets you 10 points. Everything is taken into context of what else you've done and how you're going to eventually portray that on an application.
Actually, I find it to be an interesting challenge to basically pick apart the prior application, have an in-depth discussion with the individual, asking them why do they think it didn't work out the way they wanted it to, and usually through that discussion and carefully dissecting the prior application, you can usually come up with some pretty good ideas.
Awesome. Dr. Katzen, there's a question out there from Julia that says, are non-science majors still considered competitive when applying to medical school?
The quick answer is yes. The issue is, have you fulfilled the basic requirements? There's nothing that says that medical schools only want to accept people who have done nothing with their life except study science. We want to make sure that we're accepting people who, as they become physicians, can deal with people from all walks of life. Maybe people that aren't as intelligent as the applicant, maybe people from a different culture. We want, so my point is that I think that as long as you have fulfilled the basic requirements of the standard sciences and obviously taking the MCAT, seeing somebody who's culturally developed, who's interesting, who's worldly, is not a negative, but in my mind at all.
I would agree. I mean, I think that similar to the non-traditional applicants, a non-science applicant can sometimes be at a big advantage if you play your cards correctly. Dr. Marinelli, there's questions about the AMCAS activities section. Specifically, do you recommend, number one, putting courses or sorry, not courses, but activities from high school on the application? And then number two, do I have to fill all 15 of them out?
Awesome questions. Thanks for asking those, guys. So we don't usually recommend putting activities that you did in high school on the activity section of the AMCAS unless maybe it was a very, very significant activity or you continued it through high school into college. One applicant that I worked with, he did like a research project for NASA, and like it was this awesome grand project in high school, and I was like, well, that's pretty cool. I think you could put that on your activities. Like it was pretty substantial and significant. So you had something that was really impactful or really shaped you. You spent a lot of time on something very impressive in high school, put it on there. But in general, community service or shadowing physicians, things like that, you don't want to put them on your application. And then the other question, do you have to fill all 15? Absolutely not. I have seen some applicants that have 20 awesome activities and they have to try to whittle it down into 15. But I've also seen applicants that don't have 15 activities and they try to fill them up and make, an activity its own entry if they, were a dog walker for 10 hours one time. They volunteered to watch their friend's dog and walk the dog or something like that. Well, it's not that significant activity. It doesn't really contribute to your overall application or who you are. So I recommend not trying to stretch out things to fill up those 15. If you have 10, that's fine. If you have 8, that's fine. Just make sure that they're meaningful activities, that they're significant, and you actually spent some time on those activities if you're going to make it them their own entry.
Awesome. So, we're coming up on the hour here, and there's a ton of great questions out there, and I apologize that we can't get to all of these questions, unfortunately, but I just wanted to highlight a couple other things for you guys. Obviously, I already highlighted Prospective Doctor as a great resource, as well as if you guys are on Twitter or Facebook, make sure to check out the respective social media sites of Prospective Doctor and MedSchoolCoach, because we actually answer questions there all the time as well. You can drop us questions. We post articles there all the time. I think they're really valuable resources. Obviously, again, if you're looking for sort of one-on-one help and really taking your application to the next level, that's what we do at MedSchoolCoach, so I encourage you to contact us. And then also, if you guys are part of any pre-health societies, pre-health clubs, anything out there at your individual campuses, drop us a line, because we would love to host a webinar for our small group. We actually had over 800 registrants for today's session today, and I know that's a big group, so there's hundreds of questions out there, but we do a lot of small group webinars as well, so feel free to drop us an email and we'd be happy to set that up for your group. I really want to take a second to thank Dr. Lipset, Dr. Katzen, and Dr. Marinelli for joining us tonight, and I want to thank all of you guys out there for tuning in. We had a couple of hundred people show up, and all of you guys asked amazing questions, and I know that there's a lot of burning questions still out there, so please hit us up on some of these channels that I mentioned so that we can try to help you. Good luck to everybody in the application process. I know it's tough, I know it's long, but you can get through it, and thank you again for tuning in and being a part. And again, Dr. Lipset, thank you so much. Katzen, Dr. Marinelli, thank you guys so much for coming out and giving all the applicants out here some great advice.
Thank you. Good luck to everyone.
Good luck.
Yeah, it was a pleasure participating, and I wish everyone great success.
All right. Good night, everybody, and take care.
Take care. Good night.
Night.